立法會主席。
President. Questions. Question 1. Mr. James To. President, it has been reported that recently some senior mainland officials have indicated that the Chief Executive CE is expected to be a person who loved the country and Hong Kong. It must be ensured that people who love the country and Hong Kong to govern Hong Kong on a long-term basis, and screening is a must in the CE election in 2017. These comments have aroused wide concern in the Hong Kong community that a pre-selection mechanism will be put in place in the CE election in 2017 to thwart people with political views different from those of the central authorities becoming candidates for the election. On the other hand, Article 45 of the Basic Law provides that the method for selecting the chief executive shall be specified in the light of the actual situation in the Hong Kong SAR in accordance with the principle of gradual and orderly progress. The ultimate aim is the selection of the CE by universal suffrage upon nomination by a broadly representative nominating committee in accordance with democratic procedures. In this connection, will the government inform this Council A, if it has studied 1, how the nominating committee should be formed and composed of in order to be regarded as broadly representative, 2, pursuant to the requirement that a nomination must be made in accordance with democratic procedures, whether such a nomination must be made by voting or by a method similar to the past practice, whereby anyone who has obtained nomination by a certain percentage of members of the nominating committee can become a candidate for the CE election. 3, whether the selection of CE by universal suffrage means that CE will be elected by Hong Kong people on a one-person, one-vote basis, and 4, whether there are differences between Hong Kong people and the mainland officials on the interpretation of Article 45 of the Basic Law. B, whether the authorities will introduce a screening mechanism when drawing up the nomination procedures for the CE election in 2017, so as to render people with different political views unable to become candidates, if they will, of the justifications, if not, the criteria for ensuring that the nomination procedures will not thwart people with different political views becoming candidates, and C, when the authorities will commence public consultation on the selection method for CE in 2017, whether they will consult members of the public, if a screening mechanism should be included in the nomination procedures, and if the requirements for broadly representative in accordance with democratic procedures and universal suffrage provided in Article 45 of the Basic Law need to comply with the principle of universal and equal suffrage enshrined in international treaties on human rights. Secretary for Constitutional and Mainland Affairs. President, my reply to the questions raised by Mr. James To is as follows. A, as set out in the decision on issues relating to the method for selecting the chief executive of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, Hong Kong SAR, and for forming the Legislative Council, LegCo, of Hong Kong SAR in the year 2012, and on issues relating to universal suffrage, adopted by the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress in December 2007, that the NPCSC's decision. In selecting the CE of the Hong Kong SAR by the method of universal suffrage, a broadly representative nominating committee should be formed. The nominating committee may be formed with reference to the current provisions regarding the election committee in Annex 1 to the Hong Kong Basic Law. The nominating committee shall, in accordance with democratic procedure, nominate a certain number of candidates for the office of the CE who is to be elected through universal suffrage by all registered electors of the Hong Kong SAR and to be appointed by the Central People's Government. The government will carry out a comprehensive consultation on the nomination procedure and electoral arrangements for the CE to be returned by universal suffrage elections strictly in accordance with the Basic Law and the NPCSC's decision. At present, the government does not have any preconceived position on these issues. The government would listen carefully to the views expressed by various sectors of the community, including LegCo, on these issues during the public consultation. Mr. James To, President, sorry, there's one more paragraph. As mentioned by the CE in its 2013 policy address, the government will launch a comprehensive consultation on the election methods of the CE in 2017 and the LegCo in 2016 and initiate the constitutional procedures at an appropriate juncture. Mr. James To, President, Mr. Xiao not only said the CE must be someone who loves the country and Hong Kong, and then no one who confronts the CPG should not be CE. And he said the judgment will be made by the nominating committee and then by the electors and then finally by the CPG. I would like to know, when can we find in the basic law these three criteria? After the screening by the CPG, is it that the electors can only choose someone by the name of Wah or by the name of Bo? So who is actually selecting the CE, the CPG or Hong Kong electors? President, different people in the community have been expressing views on universal suffrage. The SAR government will listen very carefully to the views expressed by all quarters. Mr. To refers to some details in his question. I believe in the consultation that is going to be launched later, there will be discussion. But before that, we are sincere, we are open-minded, we want to hear views from all sides. Mr. Stephen Ho, recently in the community, many people have tried to use loose terms and try to twist the logic. Therefore, the government must clarify the issues. So what is the position of the administration to these views? And that is some candidates will be screened out. And that is a fake universal suffrage system. Article 44, there are requirements on age and nationality. Are these criteria for the purpose of screening out some people? How would the administration explain to the people the difference between screening out certain candidates and certain requirements for the candidacy in the CE election? I think the question reflects the people adopting different perspectives in expressing different views. We are aware of such views. During the consultation, we would like to have a wide consultation in the community. We hope there will be a rational and pragmatic discussion on all these issues. Mr. Wong, President, as far as I understand the situation to be, the CPG would like to see to be a person who loves the country and Hong Kong. This is a position, this is a principle, not a legal provision. Therefore, in the future consultation and the future legislative drafting of the law, how would you ensure that in the law there will be some requirements on complying with the basic law and respecting the one country, two system principle? Secretary, in drafting the law on universal suffrage, it will be the result of wide consultation, and we will comply strictly with the basic law and the MPCSC's decision. With regard to those factors referred by Mr. Wong, I think there will be different voice expressed, and there will be comments on them. And at that point, when we conduct the public consultation, we would facilitate a wide consultation. Ms. Chiang Lai-wan, 2 days ago, Xiao said there's a requirement of the CE must be someone who loves the country and Hong Kong, and some members here instantly said that they would not be eligible is it tantamount to an admission that they do not love the country and Hong Kong? According to the basic law, this is my question. According to the basic law, LegCo members who come from different political parties, if we form the nominating committee along the lines for the election committee, would all LegCo members here, all political parties here eligible to be part of the nominating committee? And if someone is interested, would they all be eligible to stand for the CE election? Secretary, Ms. Zhang has referred to NPCSC's decision. The future nominating committee that would be composed in a way that we're making reference to the current selection committee. As for how a certain number of candidates can be selected by the nominating committee, well, it has to be through democratic procedures. As for what democratic procedures are, there are details, and at this point, the SAR government would like to hear more views on such details. Ms. Zhang also offered some views, and that would attract some response, and different views may be expressed as a result. It reflects the fact that Hong Kong is a pluralistic community, and people are very concerned about the implementation of the universal suffrage. Mr. LEUNG Che-cheung, according to the basic law, after the CE election is over, the winner will be appointed by the CPG. If we have someone who confronts the CPG, who wants to overthrow the CPG, would the CPG appoint him or her? I think we all know the answer. Recently, some Hong Kong people opined that if we accept a CE candidate who is going to confront the CPG, even if he or she wins, he will not be appointed. And therefore, such a candidate would not be nominated in the first place. Are these remarks in compliance or in conflict with the basic law? Secretary, in the basic law and also the NPCSC's decision is stated very clearly. The nominating committee has to nominate a number of CE candidates through democratic procedures, and then the election will be through a universal system where all voters or electors can vote, and then the winner will be appointed by the CPG, and this is a substantive power to appoint the CE. Mr. Raymond Wong, now you are acting like a record player, but you are not performing as well as Mr. Stephen Lam. Your voice is shaking. Mr. James To has just given us a new reminder. There's no one country, two system in Hong Kong anymore. What's your question? My question is very simple. The CE election in 2017 is a subject of a lot of debate. What is the government doing? Nothing. Can you tell me? We need to have a nominating committee. What are your ideas about this committee? We have to pass the law in 2015 to govern the election of LegCo in 2016 and the CE election in 2017. And you have done nothing. There's nothing whatsoever on the part of the administration. We are now in 2013. In 2015, we need to pass the necessary laws. What have you done so far? You have put your question to the Secretary already. Please be seated. Secretary. President, this SAR government will, at an appropriate juncture, conduct a consultation exercise. And prior to that, we hope people in the community will be involved in a pragmatic and rational discussion. I think Mr. Wong would agree with me that if before a wide consultation is conducted, it would not be appropriate for the SAR government to put forth concrete proposals. So we are willing to listen to people's views. I'm not asking for concrete proposals. We are just 2 years away from the next election, and you haven't done anything. Please don't offer comments. You have already asked your questions. Secretary, supplement? We will allow sufficient time for the 5 procedures in concern to be carried out. Mr. Gary Fan, President, CPG, the leaders have said time and again that the CE candidates must love the country and Hong Kong and fulfill other criteria. The first one to talk about this criterion was Mr. Deng Xiaoping. Deng Xiaoping said, those who respect their own people are people who love the country. Earlier, a barrister used foul language here to insult Mr. Leung Kwok-hing. You're not even a good Chinese. If this barrister by the name of Ma Yan Guo, not Mr. Ma Feng Guo, who asked us to follow local customs, will this Mr. Ma comply with the criterion of someone who loves the country and Hong Kong? Secretary, I'm not going to comment in respect of individual's case. Mr. Jeffrey Lam, my question is this. In looking for a system for the CE election through universal suffrage, how would it ensure that it would not depart from the basic law requirements and the NPCSC's decisions? Well, there will be 5 steps involved. And recently, some members and some people in the community have asked me what the 5 steps are. And sorry. A point of order. I don't want to interrupt. I don't think he has to repeat the 5 procedures. We all know that what those are. Don't waste our time. Mr. Wong, the Secretary answers members' questions in accordance with the government's policy. So please continue. To respond to Mr. Jeffrey Lam's question, I have to spell out the 5 steps so that people will understand how we can make sure that the steps required will not be departed from. The first step, the CE will submit a report to the NPCSC to ask the NPCSC to decide whether the 2 election or selection methods should be amended. The second stage, the NPCSC would decide whether there should be some amendments. And then the third step, the SAR government will present a bill for amendments. And then 2/3 of members have to pass the amendments. And then the CE must give its consent to the bill passed by the Legislative Council. And then lastly, the CE submits the law to the NPCSC for approval and for record. We ensure that these 5 steps are complied with and that will be something done in accordance with the basic law. Mr. Chung Kwok-ban, we met Mr. Qiao Xiaoyang last week. He said that the composition of the nominating committee should be along the line of the selection committee. Although we have heard many different ideas, so are we going to follow the framework of the selection committee in forming the nominating committee? Secretary, well, we have a selection committee, And in the future, the nominating committee is a new body. According to the MPCSC, we can make reference to the composition or the way the election committee is composed, but the details have to be finalized after the consultation. Mr. Lee Cheuk-yan, well, you're talking nonsense, Mr. Lau Kong-wah. You are not even a bad record player. You're wasting our time. Xiao Xiaoyang is now giving out orders saying that the CE candidate must be someone who loves the country and Hong Kong, and no one who confronts the CPG should be allowed to stand as a candidate. And Ms. An Jiang challenged us whether by saying that we are ineligible, we are admitting that we are not loving the country and Hong Kong. I would say you are not loving the country in Hong Kong. You are not asking for the end to the one-party rule. And Mr. Lau Kong-wah, why did you remain silent when Mr. Chao Xiaoyang said those things? Why didn't you say this? In accordance with the ICCPR, Article 2, no one should be stopped from exercising the rights in the covenant due to a difference in due to political views or political positions. Universal suffrage is universal and equal suffrage. Why didn't you say this to Xiao Xiaoyang? Are you dragging your feet so that you could have Mr. Chao doing the job for you? Secretary, I don't agree with Mr. Lee Cheuk-yan. I don't think the 5 steps are nonsense. There will be consultation. We are going to implement a system of universal suffrage. We must remain within the confines of the Constitution and the law, and we must carry out all these 5 steps. It's natural that there are different voices in the community. I hope all political parties, all legislative members would remain calm and deal with the issue of universal suffrage calmly and rationally. My question is not answered. I'm asking whether they are procrastinating on purpose so that things would be done for them by the CPG. We have to consult at the appropriate juncture. We have spent more than 22 minutes on this question. Let's move on to the next question.
Mr. LEUNG Che-cheung.
多謝主席。
Thank you, President. Some school principals and parents of students in NT West have relayed to me that at present, after entering Hong Kong via the Lok Ma Chau spur line control point, cross-boundary students may take local school buses with closed road permits to attend school, but the authorities have not issued CRPs to local school buses for entering the Shenzhen Bay control point. At present, quite a number of mainland students attend school in NT West after entering Hong Kong via the Shenzhen Bay control point every day. And after entering the territory, they can only wait to take the cross-boundary school coaches departing from the mainland to attend school. And as a result, these students need to spend more time traveling to school, and the fares of cross-boundary school coaches are also higher than those of local school buses. In this connection, will government inform this council of the respective number of students crossing the boundary every day to attend kindergarten, primary school, and secondary school in Hong Kong in the past school year, with a breakdown by the control point they went through of such numbers and the number of closed area permits issued to them. B, of the details of the services provided by CBSCs that go through the Shenzhen Bay control point at present, including their routes and the daily number of trips made, whether it has assessed if such services are adequate, if it has, of the outcome, and C, whether the government will consider adopting the same arrangement as that in the Lok Ma Chau spur line control point by issuing CRPs to local school buses for entering the Shenzhen Bay control point to take cross-boundary students to school, thus reducing the number of CBSCs waiting on the mainland to cross the boundary. and providing an additional choice for parents of students, if it will, of the details, if not the reasons for that. Secretary for Education. President, cross-boundary students commuting from the mainland to attend schools in Hong Kong are using 6 land boundary control points. Generally speaking, cross-boundary students of older age choose to travel to school by public transport after entering Hong Kong, while those of tender age are more likely to travel by local school buses or cross-boundary school coaches. At present, some local school buses are allowed to access the 2 BCPs at LONG Ma-chau Line and Lo Wu to take CBS to school. As regards cross-boundary school coaches, they are only allowed to access the 4 specified border control points at Shenzhen Bay, LONG Ma-chau, Man Kam To, and Sha Tau Kok, with special quotas issued by both the Hong Kong SAR government and the mainland authorities. Our reply to the member's question is as follows. A. The number of cross-boundary students attending kindergartens, primary schools, and secondary schools in Hong Kong via various BCPs and the number of closed area permits for students issued in 2011-2012 school year are set out at the annex for members' perusal. B. Every year, the government conducts a service demand survey collecting data from schools within districts served by cross-boundary school coaches, the outcome of which will be used to project the demand for special quotas for cross-boundary school coach services for the coming year. We will then work out with the mainland authorities an appropriate number of quota as well as the relevant arrangements. A total of 110 special quotas for cross-boundary school coach services were approved in the 2012-13 school year, of which 77 or 70% were for the Shenzhen Bay control point, representing a 79% increase over the 43 quotas approved in the previous year. 2 additional northbound trips were also approved to cater for the needs of students with different school dismissal hours. Currently, the cross-boundary school coaches that cross the boundary via the Shenzhen Bay boundary control point are all serving CBSs attending schools in Tuen Mun and Yuen Long. Government will strive to provide cross-boundary students with efficient transport services by coordinating the demand for cross-boundary school coach service and reviewing the relevant arrangements annually. C. Notwithstanding the difficulties in materializing the proposal of allowing local school buses to pick up cross-boundary students at the Shenzhen Bay control point, the government is open to this proposal. The original design of the coach loading and unloading facilities at the Shenzhen Bay BCP is for the use of cross-boundary vehicles only. All cross-boundary coaches must proceed to cross the boundary and are not allowed to return to Hong Kong after dropping off passengers at lay-by areas. With the ever-increasing number of cross-boundary visitors taking public transport, the public transport interchange at the Shenzhen Bay BCP is reaching its full capacity. It will therefore be difficult to identify lay-by areas at the said PTI for the local school buses' use. Having said that, the government departments concerned will carefully examine all relevant factors, including the actual operational conditions of the control point, overall needs of cross-boundary visitors, and clearance procedures and transportation arrangements of the Shenzhen Bay BCP. We will also need to discuss the issues with the Shenzhen authorities so that a practical assessment of the feasibility of the said proposal could be made. Mr. LEUNG Che-cheung. President, we can see from the figures that there will be an increase in the number of cross-boundary students using Shenzhen Bay. And for kindergartens, primary and secondary school students, there will be increases. So I think the government should be adequately prepared for this trend. At the moment, for the Shenzhen Bay control point, we have vehicles, including taxis, returning to the territory after arriving at the control point. So why is it that the secretary is telling us that there aren't enough laybys for these vehicles? Secretary. Now, when the boundary control point was designed, should I say, if members go there and have a look, they will know that the traffic is extremely busy there, and there are always several rows of buses and taxis there. And so we hope to, as far as possible, have one-way traffic. Concerning cross-boundary students, for the 2013-24 school year, we should be able to meet the more urgent demands. And of course, we will continue to consider the development in NT West. A cross-department or interdepartmental working group has just started work on how to increase the capacity and the traffic flow of the BCP, and members' suggestions will be relayed to the working group for its consideration. Mr. Michael Tian. President, every day we have over 5,000 cross-boundary primary school students coming to Hong Kong to attend school. And at the moment, the arrangements for them are rather complicated. And some local parents are of the view that children born of non-local parents are taking away a lot of the school places, and as a result, there is conflict between Hong Kong and the mainland. And mainland parents are confident or have confidence in schools in Hong Kong operated by the government. And so in order to reduce the number of cross-boundary students coming to Hong Kong to attend school every day, we have about over 5,000 primary school students coming every day. Can the Hong Kong government set up government schools in Shenzhen for these children? If you do not support the idea, then can you explain why? Secretary, just now we mentioned the school bus arrangements for cross-boundary students. And with regard to the demands for the 2013-2014 school year, we should be able to meet those demands. But then we've received suggestions like streaming and also classes for Hong Kong children. So the interdepartmental working group will be looking at all these suggestions. And so to answer the member's question, your suggestion will be considered by the working group. Mr. Kim Yun, Chairman, with regard to cross-boundary students, I think we must do proper planning. We must be able to estimate and predict the demand accurately. And one of the concerns is the fees for the school coaches. And these fees may continue to rise in the future. How can the government impose some control over the level of fees? So we have to look at the demand. It is said that every year the government conducts a service demand survey collecting data from schools within districts served by cross-boundary school coaches, and the outcome of which will be used to project the demand for special quotas for cross-boundary school coach service for the coming year. But then I understand that this survey has not been done yet. So how can you accurately project the demand in the coming year? And at the same time, how can you impose some control over the level of coach fees? So what is the focus of your question? President, we have to try to control the level of fees, and before that can be done, we must have rather accurate estimates concerning the demand for the service. Secretary. President, I think there are a number of factors we need to consider. Now, most of the coach services are privately operated, and so we don't have the say concerning the level of fees. With regard to public transport, for example, railway service, we are able to do more. For example, we can have discussions with the MTRCL concerning fare concessions and discounts. For example, concerning a 12-month fare system, it has been reduced to a 10-month system or an 8-month system. In other words, at about $2,000 per year. And then with regard to traffic arrangements in the North District, I want to say that coaches serving this area, in fact, demand lower fees than coaches which have to operate in Shenzhen as well. So we also need to consider all these factors. So I said that your question has not been answered. My question has not been answered. Please repeat your question then. President, the Secretary talked about supply. Please repeat your question. I'm talking about the demand. Please repeat the part of the question which has not been answered. You have to ascertain the demand before you can find some ways to control the level of fees. I don't quite understand your question. Perhaps, Secretary, you may be in a position to understand the question better. President, I do understand the demand and supply situation. So we're basically able to deal with the demand in 2013, 2014. Concerning what's going to happen beyond 2014, we will carefully assess the trend. And concerning the mode of transport service, we have to look at the existing mechanism, and when we issue a license, we'll also need to take into account the fees. I want to say that requirements for kindergarten, primary, and secondary school students are different. Some have to rely on cross-boundary coach service. Some rely on other types of services. Mr. Tam Yu-chung, now at the moment we have quite a large number of cross-boundary students coming to Hong Kong to attend school every day. Just now, a member suggested that the government should operate some schools in Shenzhen for children who are eligible. But of course, we understand that there are factors that the government needs to consider in implementing such a proposal. So can you consider something like a board play scheme? In other words, you can identify mainland schools which offer a similar curriculum and which are of good quality, which provide quality education service, and the education or the curriculum of which can converge with the Hong Kong curriculum. So can you consider buying places from these schools? President, now we are of the view that as far as possible, students should attend school in the district that they live. And so we will actively consider the suggestion. Mr. LEUNG Kwok. Yes, President. Now, in fact, a few years before, there was the administrative measure to control the number of mainland parents coming to Hong Kong to give birth to babies. There were tens of thousands of students, cross-boundary students, over 30,000. And in fact, 10% would mean 3,000. So I would like to know whether the administration has predicted the number of cross-boundary students in the coming years, and whether they will be kindergarten students, primary school students, or what. Do you have such estimates or predictions? And can you provide such information to the Council? And if you don't have the information, can you tell us why you haven't done such predictions? Yes, President, from 2006 to 2012, every year, considering the number of students, one of mainland parents, we had 16,000 in 2006, and then 18,000 in 2007, and then 29,000 in 2009, 32,000 in 2010, and 2011, 35,736, and then 2012, 23,000. Then there was the administrative measure. So we've come up with estimates based on these figures. I want to say that, in fact, a subjective choice is involved with regard to the choice of the place where the school is. But I want to say that we do have such assessments, but we want to do the estimate well, and we will also be contacting parents if possible. And so I can assure members that we will step up the collection of data, and if members are interested in the data, then we can provide them to members later.
The third question, Mr. Raymond Wong. Mr. President, I have received requests for assistance from quite a number of members of the public. They pointed out that some elderly people in an unsatisfactory state of health and in need of care services have been assessed under the current standardized care need assessment mechanism for elderly services as having no urgent need for admission to subsidized residential care homes for the elderly, RCHEs, and therefore had to wait a long time for places in such homes. In this connection, will the government inform this Council A of the criteria based on which the Social Welfare Department assesses under the standardized care need assessment mechanism whether an elderly person has an urgent need for admission to subsidized RCHE, and B, given that the aforesaid group of elderly people need to stay in private homes while waiting for admission to a subsidized home, and private homes often charge such group of elderly people high accommodation fees, but the CSSA payments granted to them are insufficient to pay for such fees, where the government will consider providing special financial assistance to such group of elderly people if you will note of the reasons for that. Secretary for Labour and Welfare. Mr. President, my reply to the question raised by the Honourable WONG Yuk-man is as follows. A. The Social Welfare Department, SWD, has implemented the Standardized Care Need Assessment Mechanism for Elderly Services and the Central Waiting List for Subsidized Long-Term Care Services, CWL, since November 2000 and November 2003, respectively, for the purpose of providing a better allocation allocation mechanism for subsidized long-term care LTC services for elderly applicants. The assessment mechanism adopts an internationally recognized assessment tool named Minimum Dataset Home Care (MDSHC) to identify the LTC needs of the elderly people. The scope of the assessment criteria is comprehensive, including applicants' abilities in carrying out daily activities, their physical functioning, memory, communication skills, behavior and emotion, health conditions, the environmental risk, and their abilities in coping with daily living, etc. The assessment is conducted by accredited assessors. After applicants' LTC needs have been confirmed by the assessment mechanism, their applications will be listed in central waiting list for suitable LTC services allocation. There is residential care services, RCS, or community care services, CCS, or both, in accordance with the assessment results and the recommended service matching. At present, about 62% of the elderly eligible for LTC services are matched to both RCS and CCS according to the assessment results. Under the CWL, LTC services will be allocated to the applicants in accordance with the order of the application dates and their indicated preferences. For RCS, applicants may indicate their preference on the locations in terms of region, district, or specific home, religious background, and diet provision of the homes. Besides, applicants may indicate whether they would accept subsidized places provided under various board place schemes, or even request admission to the same homes with their family members, relatives, or friends at the same time, etc. Generally speaking, waiting time can be shortened if applicants have not indicated any preference over the choice of the residential care homes for the elderly, especially for care and attention place applications. According to the statistics as of the month of January 2013, for applicants who accepted subsidized places provided under the Enhanced Board Place Scheme, EBPS, their average waiting time was 8 months. For those applicants who accepted subsidized places under EBPS and at the same time had no indicated preferences including location, diet, and religious background, etc., of the home, an EBPS place could be offered within 1 month at the earliest. For applicants who genuinely have urgent needs for taking up residential care places where their needs cannot be met by the provision of CCS or admission to self-financing or private RCS, nor do they have family members or friends to provide adequate care and support in the community, caseworkers responsible for the elderly applicants concerned could make a recommendation to SWD after vetting the cases for providing priority placement as subsidized RCHEs. Part B. Elderly persons in financial hardship, regardless of whether they are living at home or in residential care homes, may apply for Comprehensive Social Security Assistance, CSSA for short, to meet their basic needs. At present, the CSSA scheme has set a higher asset limit for elderly applicants and provided higher standard rates, special grants, and supplements for elderly recipients to meet their special needs. Having regard to the fact that some elderly persons in need of RCS are residing in non-subsidized RCHEs, we have introduced since June 2012 a residential care supplement under the CSSA scheme for recipients aged 60 or above who occupy non-subsidized residential care places so as to ease the financial burden. The current amount of the supplement is $275 per month. Depending on their health conditions, singleton elderly recipients living in non-subsidized residential care places may receive CSSA monthly payments generally ranging from $4,803 to $6,868. Elderly recipients may deploy their CSSA payments to meet their individual needs, including their residential care expenses. Besides, depending on their individual circumstances, elderly recipients may also receive special grants to meet their special needs, such as transport fares to and from hospital clinic, costs of medically recommended diets, costs of medical and rehabilitation appliances, including diapers, etc. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Wong. Mr. President, in relation to the subsidized RCHEs, I took up the membership of electrical member in 2008. I have been pursuing this matter since, but I have seen no improvement. Every time Mr. Matthew Zhang comes here and he'll just repeat himself like a human flash recorder. In 2011, for elders who couldn't wait for their turn to be admitted to a RCHE. There were 5,700 of them. For the budget, you will only add 600 places. So I'm not able to reply to my specific question. There was a case, an elderly applicant was very frail in his health, and later on he died without getting to his turn. So what is the criteria? A person was on the verge of passing away and still he didn't get to his turn. Mr. Secretary, Mr. Wong is very concerned about the issue. We totally understand it, and in fact we're equally concerned. In my reply, I've already said that when there's an urgent need, we do have clear rules to deal with them urgently. For the majority of the elders, they can be admitted to a private RCE, and in fact our CSSA payment can help such elderly applicants to be admitted to a private home before getting to their turn, and then there will be smooth transition. Many elders have done that, but he hasn't answered my question. Many private RCEs are not actually providing proper service. $275 per month as the supplement is not even enough to buy the diapers. Please ask your question. I have to condemn the SWD as well as the Secretary for Labor and Welfare. You have no concern for the elders. Every year I have to repeat this question again. Do I have to repeat it until the end of my term? Mr. Wong, you haven't actually raised the question for the SLW to answer. Mr. Peter Cheung. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just now, the Secretary for Labor and Welfare explained what's meant by the standardized care need assessment mechanism. Since year 2000, the standardized assessment mechanism was introduced, and 10 years have passed since then. But then there have been many changes within the mechanism that should be implemented as suggested by the welfare sector. But so far, they haven't been taken on board, and there wasn't a review. Say, for example, there are certain assessment tools which are not comprehensive enough for those suffering from dementia. And then if there is somebody willing to take care of the elders within the family setting, again the scores will be much lower. Therefore, in other words, in relation to the carers, you expect the carers to be taking care of the elders on a full-time basis, but in fact, this may not be possible. Now, for this mechanism, it has been established for 12 years. Are you going to start a review so that the sector's proposals can be implemented? Secretary, I would like to thank Mr. Cheung for his comments and his proposals. Let me first of all explain a word about the mechanism for assessment. It's internationally recognized, and in fact, Hong Kong U did have input, and it was also arrived at after having consulted the sector, so it is credible. I agree with you. We have got new data. Perhaps it's time to carry out a review since it has been there for 12 years. Mr. Cheung, I'm willing to do it. I will talk to the SWD. I'll see if we can start a review ASAP so as to improve upon the mechanism. Thank you for your suggestion. Mr. Michael Tian, Mr. President, according to a trade association, 80% of the elders admitted to private RCEs are on CSSA, but then their family members cannot chip in so as to add to the money available for the expenditure. Because they have to declare that they are not willing to take care of the applicants. While waiting for their turn to have a subsidized place, many of them have to go to a private home. So would the SWD relax the requirements concerning a declaration on the part of family members not to take care of the elders so that the family members can also contribute towards the cost in a limited way of residing at a private home? If not, why so stubborn? Secretary, well, we hope that you won't refer to the declaration as a declaration of being a unfilial member. Well, in fact, when we give CSSA payment to an elderly person, we have to check whether there is a need for it, and we have to check whether there are other sources of income. So we must go through a certain set of procedures because we are responsible for the dispensing of public money. So we ask the same questions. Same questions are directed at each and every applicant, not just elders who have family member support. Yes, in the long term, we'll try to see if there are other alternatives, but it is not an easy task. You have to strike a balance between the use of public money and the needs of individual applicants. As to whether we can allow family members to chip in towards the cost or the accommodation fees at a private RCHE, but then that would bring in the question of having an additional source of income. Yes, it is a fact that many elderly applicants have to wait for a long time. We are doing things in parallel. We are increasing the number of places all the time. We are going to have 2,300 more up to the year 2015 to 16. And then we would like to see if we can have more homes by redevelopment at 8 locations. But of course, aging in community should also be developed. 62% of the elders have been found to be suitable for matching to both RCS and CCS. So we have to improve the community care services as well. And then with improvement in the residential care services, we can ease the pressure on the family members and we can meet the needs of the elders. Mr. President, I can't quite catch the answer. Does it mean that the means testing will not be relaxed or will it be considered? Secretary. At this moment, we do not intend to do this, but we'll be monitoring closely to see if there are other alternatives to improve the entire set of arrangements. Thank you. Mr. Albert Chan. Mr. President, when the Secretary answers this question, or questions of a similar nature, well, he is being hypocritical and he's trying to divert our attention. He's trying to shirk the responsibility. It is the government's duty to provide such places. Thousands of them are waiting for a place. 5,000 of them couldn't wait for their turn and they passed away. So many elders are still suffering. So the question is, how are you going to improve upon the mechanism so that you can lessen the suffering of the elders so that they won't pass away without getting to their turn? They go to the cemetery rather than go to a RCHE. Well, some of them have already gone to private homes. Albert Chan, your question. Now, I think according to your answer, you are not able to solve the problem. You're trying to spend money so that the elders will use other services. So is the government giving up its basic duty? Are you admitting that you are incompetent and so you are unconscientious and you are not able to solve the problem? Secretary, well, I need to clarify. In fact, the current term administration is very concerned about services for the elders. This is one of our priority areas. We'll certainly put in more efforts. We'll get more resources, both hardware and software, to improve the service. I'm fully aware of your concerns. We are just as committed. Yes, the queue is long, the waiting time is long, too long, and we'll do more by way of CCS. There will be more places under the RCS. We'll try to have quality places under the bot place scheme. All of them are grade 1 or grade A services with nurses attending the homes. So we hope that the elders can have a better time while staying at such a home. Mr. President, I'm still concerned about the government's duty, but he's still talking about private homes. What is your question? Now, the elders are still not able to wait for their turn before they pass away. I think he has already answered your question. Mr. LEUNG Che-cheung, I think we all know that for places bought from the private homes, every month the government has to pay. Every month you have to pay $7,000. But then for an elderly person residing at a private home, he receives $2,000 by way of CSSA. So there is a shortfall of $5,000. In other words, the CSSA payment given to an elderly person is not enough to pay for the accommodation fee at a private home. So SWD colleagues have been asked to resort to different sorts of excuses to get special grants and special supplement to find extra resources to meet the payment. But sometimes there is still not enough money for that purpose. Now, we've been told that the supplement is $275 a month. I want to know about the criteria as to why you think that $275 a month is adequate by way of a supplement. But in fact, the reality is that the shortfall is much greater than that. Are you going to raise the amount so as to meet the shortfall? Secretary, thank you, Mr. Leung, for his question. Well, $275 a month is the supplement. In the reply, I've said that an elderly person residing at such a home will receive between $4,800 to $6,800 a month. Now, for those who have frail health, they need special diets. They need to spend on medical and rehabilitation appliances, including diapers, and they will get paid other than the $4,000 to $6,000 plus dollars. So they will be paid outside of the CSSA payments, and it will be on an accountable reimbursement basis. We'll make sure that for those residing at a private home, for the time being, while waiting for a subsidized place, will still be able to get their ends met. I don't think he has answered my question. Now, you need to pay $7,000 under the board place scheme, but you only get $2,000, and then you have $275 a supplement. In other words, just $2,200 something. So we need to find the figure $275. We know that it's inadequate. How is he going to make up for the shortfall? Secretary, Mr. Leung, you're focusing on $275. I don't think that's supposed to meet the shortfall of $2,000. The $275 is a supplement to provide something extra. It used to be given to the PWDs only. Now it has been extended to the elders. We just want to give something extra. No, my question hasn't been fully answered. How did they arrive at the figure of $275? He hasn't answered the question, but I'll just give it up. But what about the shortfall? How is it going to be made up? No, I think he has mixed up two sums. Well, usually such homes would charge $4,000, $5,000, or $6,000. And say, for example, if the fee is $4,800, then the CSSA payment would be adequate. For other things like diapers and special diets, they will be refunded. That's different from the fees under the board place scheme. Please do not mix them up. Mr. Chung Kok-hing, recently, I have received some associations providing private homes. It has been said that as a result of the increase in the rental, usually if they accept an elder who is on CSSA, they are not able to make their ends meet. In other words, they are afraid that a lot of such private homes may have to be closed. In other words, elders residing at the private homes have nowhere to go. So how is the government going to deal with it? Secretary, for such private homes, they have to notify the SWD as part of the mechanism. Proper arrangements must be made. They have to inform the family members. They have to notify the SWDs. We do have a contingency plan. Say, for example, referring the elders to nearby homes and make sure that the family members have other choices. This is not something which hasn't happened before. We have got sufficient contingency plans, and in fact, there are sufficient places. In fact, the vacancy rate is about 28% in the private homes. In other words, other private homes can take over the elders being referred to them from other homes. Mr. Kwok-hing, Mr. President, the CSSA payments are not good enough to pay for the accommodation fees at a private RCHE. Now, $275 is the supplement, but it's not good enough to fill the shortfall. Mr. President, the Secretary has said that the average time to wait for a place is 8 months, and the earliest would be 1 month in relation to EBPS places. But I don't think this is actually the time taken to wait for the turn. Do you have the figures? How many elders have to wait for 6 to 12 months, while others 12 to 24 months, and then 24 to 36 months? Secretary, let me clarify a point. The supplement is there to ease the burden in relation to the accommodation fees. This is not supposed to be the shortfall. Please do not mix up the two concepts. Waiting time for care and attention homes, on average 37 months. For RCHEs with a medium degree of impairment, 25 months. And then on average, but then for board place scheme places, shorter, 7 to 8 months. Now, what I have said in the reply is that if you just want to have a place, if you don't have any preferences at all, and then it is a fact that you can get your place in a month's time. But of course, I understand the elders have many factors to consider, like the location, the district, is it easy for family members to visit, etc. So they may not just take any offers. As I have said, 30% of the elders, when offered an allocated place, would reject it. And in fact, this will affect the waiting time. Mr. Kwok asked for the information. I'll just check with my colleagues as to whether we can generate the figures from our computer system. We spent almost 23 minutes on this question.
Question 4, Cyd Ho. Thank you, Mr. President. As revealed in Chapter 10 of the Directive Orders Report number 57, which reports on the audit review of the records management work of the Government Records Service, GRS, the Independent Commission Against Corruption, ICAC, has established its own records management policy and procedures having regard to the government's practices, relevant statutory requirements, and the ICAC's unique operational need, and has its own approving authority for records disposal schedules and records destruction procedures. However, some members of the public have pointed out that as anti-corruption work and the establishment of ICAC have become part of Hong Kong's history, in which Hong Kong takes pride among the Chinese communities, ICAC's records are of great historical value. In this connection, will the government inform this council, A, of the number of records relating to the establishment of ICAC created by the authorities before the establishment of ICAC on the 15th of February 1974, and the respective numbers of records created by ICAC in each of the two periods from its establishment to the 30th of June 1997 and from the 1st of July 1997 to the 31st of January 2013, the respective numbers of records appraised by GRS, transferred to GRS for retention, retained by ICAC, and destroyed by ICAC in each of the three aforesaid periods. If no records have been ever handled by GRS, of the reasons for that. B, of ICAC's existing records management policies and procedures and the grade and rank of its personnel responsible for approving records disposal schedules and records destruction, the records management training received by the relevant personnel and their academic qualifications, and C, whether ICAC's records management policies have included the element of preservation of history, if so, of the implementation measures and approach in this respect, as well as the procedures whereby the public may request access to records of closed cases and records that have been created over 30 years, whether ICAC has all along upheld confidentiality as the objectives of the record management policy and regularly destroyed records concerned in order to achieve this objective. Chief Secretary for Administration, Mr. President, the Administration attaches great importance to records management and is committed to appraising and retaining government records of archival value. Subsequent to the publication of the Orders Report number 57, the Administration has implemented a series of measures as an active response to the recommendations of the report. As regards records management of the ICAC, prior to the publication of the report in end 2011, ICAC has established its own records management policy and procedures, mainly by making reference to the administration's practice of records management and taking account of factors such as its actual operation, the need for confidentiality, requirements of relevant legislation such as the PDPO, Cap 486, and the archival value of records. In response to the recommendations made in the report, ICAC, upon seeking legal advice, affirmed that the mandatory records management requirements promulgated by the administration through General Circular would be applicable to ICAC. Such requirements have been implemented in ICAC in an earnest manner since M2011. My reply to the question raised by Ms. Cyd Ho is as follows. A. ICAC currently currently maintains around 130 records relating to its establishment. Since its inception up to end of January 2013, ICAC has created a total of around 240,000 records. As ICAC has only introduced the barcoding file management system in phases since 1998 for management of records, the exact figures for the periods specified in the question are not available. Since its inception up to end of 2011, ICAC destroyed around 78,000 records according to its own records management policy and procedures. Among the destroyed records, around 51,000 were program records of closed cases, while the remaining were mainly administrative records which were beyond the retention period and without operational needs or archival value. ICAC has implemented the mandatory records management requirements since the end of 2011, which include obtaining prior agreement of the Government Records Service Director before destroying any records. In accordance with the aforementioned requirements, ICAC applied to the GRSD for the destruction of 52 administrative records in 2012. Such records were not transferred to GRS for permanent retention, as GRS had confirmed that the records had no archival value. As at the end of January 2013, ICAC maintained a total of around 162,000 records. B. As mentioned in the preamble, ICAC has, having regard to the administration's practices, established its own records management policy and procedures to ensure proper management of its records. In response to the recommendations made in the report, ICAC, upon seeking legal advice, affirmed in the end of 2011 that the mandatory records management requirements promulgated by the administration were applicable to the ICAC and has implemented such requirements in an earnest manner. Since then, the records management requirements applicable to ICAC are of no difference from those applicable to other bureaus and departments. Generally speaking, the mandatory requirements to be followed include the following: A. Inform GRS of any replacement of its departmental records manager DRM. B. Prepare and maintain any accurate records inventory. C. Print and file email records. D. Ensure that any new records classification scheme is approved by the DRM. E. Adopt a standard classification scheme designed by GRS for all administrative records no later than April 2012. F. Review the records classification schemes every 2 to 3 years. G. Establish draft disposal schedules covering all existing programs not later than April 2012. H. Transfer records with archival value to GRS according to the respective disposal schedules. I. Dispose of time-expired records at least once every 2 years, with such disposal of records considered and endorsed in writing by a senior officer. J. Obtain prior agreement of the GRSD before destroying any records. K. Ensure that the records disposal process is properly supervised. L. Put in place arrangements as appropriate to ensure proper custody and storage of records and investigate cases of any loss or unauthorized destruction of records. And M. Draw up an action plan no later than April 2012 to identify and protect vital records. Since ICAC is required to handle a substantial amount of confidential and sensitive information, 2 management staff members at the rank of Senior Commission Against Corruption Officer are currently appointed as ICAC's DRMs. CACROs or EOs in ICAC's various departments are appointed as assistant DRMs. ICAC also requires that all disposal proposals on ICAC records should be subject to the approval of an officer at the rank of assistant director or above to ensure that records are properly managed and in compliance with the mandatory records management requirements promulgated by the government. Prior agreement of the GRSD must be sought if any records are to be destroyed. In addition, members of the clerical officer grade in file registries and confidential registries of various departments also provide support for records management. Most of the ICAC officers responsible have taken the training courses offered by GRS. Such courses cover areas such as creation, classification, storage, protection, and disposal of records. Moreover, ICAC conducts relevant in-house training for civilian staff to enhance experience sharing and exchange of views. C. In the past, ICAC established its own records management policy and procedures by making reference to the administration's practice of records management and taking into account factors such as its actual operation, the need for confidentiality, requirements of relevant legislations, and archival value of records. In the end of 2011, the mandatory records management requirements promulgated by the administration became applicable to ICAC. One of the requirements pertains to the submission of draft retention and disposal schedules to be developed with reference to the administrative, operational, fiscal, and legal requirements, as well as the archival value of records for GRS's consideration. ICAC will then decide how to handle his records in accordance with the disposal schedules approved by GRS. Members of the public may apply to ICAC for assessing his records according to the Code on Access to Information. ICAC, in accordance with the requirements and guidelines, transfer records with archival values to GRS for permanent retention upon the latter's appraisal. These archival records will be open to public access in accordance with the Public Records Access Rules 1996. Ms. Cyd Ho. Well, the ICAC has destroyed a vast number of records amounting to 78,000. According to the Public Records Access Rules 1996, even for records created before 1983, those should be made available for public access at the GRS, but now the records are kept by the ICAC. And why is the administration allowing ICAC to become an independent kingdom and not requiring ICAC to follow the relevant rules? Chief Secretary. Mr. President, of course we agree with Ms. Cyd Ho the significance of records with archival value. In the end of 2011, subject to the Audit Report number 57, the ICAC and the administration discussed with us on the way forward, and upon seeking legal advice, we confirmed that the general circular on the records management requirements would be applicable to ICAC. And ICAC, since then, has been required to follow the mandatory records management requirements. It's true that 130 records are still retained or kept in custody by ICAC, but the GRS, upon approving the tentative disposal records of disposal schedule, will require the ICAC to pass 130 records to GRS for appraising. Mr. James Tin. Mr. President, I'd like to ask the CS4A regarding the first paragraph of her reply about the 78,000 records being destroyed. 51,000 records were program records of closed cases, while the remaining were mainly administrative records. But I'm also concerned that in the past, when investigations were kick-started by the ICAC, at first there were headline news, but then the news seemed to have disappeared. I wonder if these records of investigation of closed cases would be retained or what? Chief Secretary. As members may be aware, my reply is actually quite some details. Because I need to seek information from ICAC, I need to be careful in giving this reply on behalf of ICAC. Now, about Mr. James Tin's question, in the end of 2011, even before the ICAC was required to manage its records according to our mandatory records management requirements, its own records management policy and procedures had incorporated a number of factors, including the actual operation of ICAC, the need for confidentiality, and the relevant legislation. At the same time, the ICAC also considered the historical value of such records. So I believe the ICAC, in deciding the disposal of records, have already considered the factors I mentioned. Your question hasn't been answered? Now, my question is that upon investigation, some of these cases may not be substantiated, and have these been put in the ICAC's records? I'm sorry, I cannot answer this question, but after this session, I will refer this question to ICAC. Mr. Albert Ho. Mr. President, I'm very concerned about what happened before 2012, and that ICAC itself destroyed around 78,000 records, such a large number. Now, although we have this system in place, and I think the CS must have discussed with ICAC on the criteria in managing records, and there should be considerations like actual operation of ICAC, the need for confidentiality, requirements of relevant information, and archival value of records. Now, Mr. President, about actual operation for cases over 30 years ago in relation to the need for confidentiality and the requirement of relevant legislation. To CS's understanding, would the relevant legislation be applicable to those cases over 30 years old? If the legislation is no longer applicable, can you tell me what criteria would be adopted and who would be the gatekeeper? For example, if those cases are no longer valid, or if the legislation has been repealed, who would be the gatekeeper? After the end of 2011, in terms of records management policy and procedures of the ICAC, as I mentioned in the main reply, they are of no difference than those of other government bureaus and departments. So in paragraph 2 of my reply, I have already set out in detail the requirements to be followed by ICAC as well as other government departments and bureaus. And those include a draft disposal schedules to be established, and based on the disposal schedule, the ICAC is required to transfer records with archival value to GRS, and before destruction of any such records, approval or prior agreement of GRSD must be sought. So as far as the gatekeeper is concerned, of course, the GRS, which is of a professional status, would be the gatekeeper. As for cases of over 30 years, whether they should be made available for public access, I would ask members to refer to the Public Records Access Rules 1996, as mentioned in my reply. Under some circumstances, there could be exemptions. That is to say, those records would not be available for public access for the time being, but the relevant policy bureau would need to state its grounds for seeking exemption for public access of those records, even those records may be over 30 years old. Dr. Kenneth Chan. Thank you, Mr. President. I think Hong Kong is lagging far behind the international trend for many years as far as establishing archive law and information technology laws are concerned. From this reply, we can see that in terms of ICAC's records management policy procedures, we are lagging far behind and there are problems to be resolved. We're not just talking about creating and storing records when we talk about archive law. I'd like to know the procedures for keeping or managing records by the ICAC, and I'd like to know the qualification of such personnel handling these records. So my question for the administration is, would the administration kickstart a consultation of the archive law and freedom of information law? Yes. Well, in January, the administration already made a statement in relation to these two matters mentioned by Dr. Kenneth Chan, and these two matters would be passed on to the Law Reform Commission for further studies. On these two topics, the LRC is conducting, and the Ombudsman is carrying out a direct investigation, and we will brief members on the work in due course. Mr. Lee Cheng-yen. Thank you, Mr. President. It's really scary how ICAC is handling the records. Some 100 records, 52 records were destroyed by ICAC in 2012, but before that, 78,000 records had already been destroyed by ICAC, so they're gone. So without the archive law, the ICAC can, on its own initiative, destroy records at will. So you can see the drastic difference of 78,000 and 52 records destroyed. Now, I'd like to know about the 160,000 records. Now, they have been classified and the records with archival value should be transferred to GLS, but it hasn't taken place yet. So what is the status of these records? And CS just mentioned that the GLS has the expertise to appraise the records, but the former GLSD already said that they do not have the expertise to appraise the records. So I'd like to know the status of those 160,000 records. Yes. For the 162,000 records, currently they are maintained by the ICAC. But as I mentioned in the main reply, since the mandatory records management requirements being applicable to ICAC, the ICAC has introduced a series of measures. I won't repeat them, they're stated in my reply, but basically they include the records classification scheme, so on and so forth. As for Mr. Lee Cheuk-yan's concern on when the ICAC's records will be transferred to GLS for appraising, whether they should be kept on the grounds of historical significance. Well, we hope that by August 2013, ICAC would be able to provide the first batch of expired files or records for GLS to carry out appraisal work. Dr. Kwok-Ka-ki. Mr. President, before 2011, the ICAC destroyed around 78,000 records. Last year, as we recall, there were a series of corruption allegations against government officials, including the chief executive, and these records are very important as they are of public interest. Now, the administration had allowed ICAC to destroy around 78,000 records before the end of 2011. But the point is whether GLS has the capacity to determine or praise those records. So my question is, if the case or the records involved a public figure or government official, is it one of the justifications for the GLS to disallow ICAC from destroying records at will? Yes. In appraising records from relevant government bureaus and departments that have passed the disposal schedules, they appraise the value and see whether those records could be open to public access. This is the archival value of the records. And as I'm not an expert, it's not for me to say here the consideration of individual cases by the GLS in appraising the records. My question was very clear. If the case or the record involves a government official, is that one of the grounds for keeping the record? I think CS has already answered your question, Ms. Cyd Ho. Mr. President, after introduction of the guidelines, within a year, 52 records were passed to GLS for appraisal, but before introduction of the guidelines, 78,000 records had been destroyed. So per year, 1,942 records were destroyed. So that's 14 times. Those records should have been passed to GLS for appraisal. Has the administration questioned the vast difference of those figures? Has ICAC been playing delaying tactics in transferring records to GLS for appraisal? Yes. I think the asymmetrical figures cited by Ms. Cyd Ho. Ms. Cyd Ho, what's your question? I want to clarify, this is not just an assumption. This is the data provided by the CS to us. That's 1,942 per year and 78,000 records over the period. CS, Sorry, I haven't finished. I'm not saying that the calculations based on the data given but are subjective. What I want to say is before the end of 2011, the number of records destroyed comparing to the number of records transferred to GRS for appraisal after the end of 2011 may reflect the operation of the requirements. Now, many of the 78,000 records were program records of closed cases, and some were records generated in the course of investigation, including minutes of the meeting, etc. The ICAC has considered the records management policies and procedures of the administration in deciding whether such records should be destroyed or kept. It's not the case that they deliberately destroy records. It just reflects the effectiveness in managing their own records.
Question 5, Mr. Wong Kwok-hing. President, regarding the safety of vessels, will the government inform this council, A, given that if a vessel is provided with an internal watertight subdivision arrangement, water will not flood from the damaged compartments into undamaged ones in the event of the rupture of the hull, thereby preventing or delaying the sinking of the vessel. Whether there are provisions in existing legislation requiring passenger ships registered in Hong Kong to be fitted with watertight compartments and watertight doors, as well as on the design and construction standards of such installations. If there are, of the details. What corresponding requirements are to be met by non-Hong Kong registered passenger ships before they make cruise in Hong Kong waters? B, whether the Marine Department or MD had in the past 3 years conducted regular and surprise inspections comprehensively to verify if passenger ships registered in Hong Kong had been fitted with watertight compartments and watertight doors, and these installations could function normally. If it had, of the details and of the number of ships found not in compliance with the requirements, and how the government had followed up such cases. And C, whether MD had conducted in the past 6 months a comprehensive review of the legislation governing the safety of vessels as well as its law enforcement procedures and work, if it had, of the details and the improvement measures, and if it had not, the reasons for that. Secretary for Transport and Housing. President, in relation to the different part of the question, our reply is as follows. A, when designing a vessel, its hull is divided into a number of compartments. The bulkheads are the structure used in separating these compartments. There are 2 types of bulkheads, watertight and non-watertight. Other than strengthening the structure of a vessel, watertight bulkheads serve to divide the hull into a number of watertight compartments so as to prevent ingress of water from a damaged watertight compartment to other compartments. This can maintain the residual buoyancy of the hull and prevent the vessel from sinking or slow down the sinking. If there has to be an access opening in the watertight bulkhead, watertight fixture, such as watertight doors, must be installed and kept closed during sailing. Under the Merchant Shipping Local Vessels Ordinance, Cap 548, the Marine Department, or MD, has issued the Code of Practice Safety Standards for Classes 1, 2, and 3 vessels, or otherwise known as Code of Practice, which sets out the detailed requirements for the provision of watertight bulkheads. They include the provision of at least 3 watertight bulkheads on locally licensed ferries and launches, with 1 fitted at the 4th peak tank and the other 2 on the 2 ends of the engine room. For ferries and launches with capacity of more than 100 passengers, their ability to resist sinking must meet the requirements of damaged stability, i.e., when one watertight compartment is ruptured, the vessel should still maintain sufficient residual buoyancy. Such requirements are the same as those applied by Singapore and Japan to their local vessels. Locally licensed ferries and launches are required to undergo annual inspections. The MD will examine the watertight bulkheads as well as the structure, main engines, and safety equipment of a vessel during annual inspection, and will only issue a certificate of survey and a license after ensuring that all standards are met. For ocean-going passenger ships registered in Hong Kong, including the high-speed craft plying between Hong Kong and Macau, and ocean-going ships registered in any other places, the provision of watertight bulkheads must comply with the requirements of the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, adopted by the International Maritime Organization. While at least 3 watertight bulkheads shall be provided, more bulkheads may be required, depending on factors such as the size, structural and stability condition of the vessel. All ships carrying passengers are required to meet the standards on damage stability. The MD conducts annual inspection of ocean-going passenger ships registered in Hong Kong. It will examine the watertight bulkheads as well as the structure, main engines, and safety equipment of a ship, and will only issue a passenger ship safety certificate after ensuring that all standards are met. For foreign ships visiting Hong Kong, they have all along been subject to port state control inspection by the MD. If the watertight bulkheads or other parts of the ship are found to be in breach of the convention, the ship will be detained and can leave Hong Kong only upon rectification of the defects and re-inspection. B. The number of annual inspections conducted by the MD on locally licensed ferries and launches and ocean-going passenger ships registered in Hong Kong, including the high-speed craft plying between Hong Kong and Macau in the 3 years from 2010 to 2012, are set out in the annex. Apart from annual inspections, the MD has conducted special inspections on the watertight bulkheads on all locally licensed ferries and launches since the end of last year. As it March the 22nd this year, through the annual inspection, MD has inspected 134 ferries and launches with a capacity of more than 100 passengers and 138 smaller ferries and launches, representing 99% and 82% of the 2 categories mentioned above. The watertight bulkheads of most of the inspected vessels met the standards, except for 1 ferry, whose rubber gasket on the frame of the watertight door was found to be damaged, and for 5 smaller launches, whose watertight fittings of pipe penetration through the watertight bulkheads were found with minor defects. The MD had requested for rectification of the defects and will arrange for re-inspection of these vessels. In addition to inspecting the watertight bulkheads, the MD also re-examines the construction of vessels to see if they comply with approved plans. The MD expects to complete inspecting the remaining vessels and launches within April this year. C. The administration is conducting a comprehensive review of the existing regulatory regime and the relevant legislation governing passenger carrying vessels. The MD has commissioned a Lloyd's Register, an overseas expert, to review the MD's current procedures for surveys and approval of plans. The Lloyd's will make risk assessment and recommendations, and this will be completed within April this year. Meanwhile, the MD also commissioned an international marine consultant in January this year to conduct a benchmark survey comparing Hong Kong's safety requirements for locally licensed passenger carrying vessels with those enforced in Singapore, Sydney of Australia, Southampton of the UK. Recommendations will be made based on the comparison. The survey will be completed in April. President, the traffic in Hong Kong waters is busy. With safety first as the principle, the government will continue to maintain marine safety and endeavour to optimize the policy on an institutional arrangement for regulation of local vessels and marine safety. Mr. WONG Kwok-hing, President, when the Lama disaster occurred, myself and the union went to Queen Mary Hospital to help the victims' families to look for their family members. And there were broken families, and it was very distressing. I feel really distressed regarding this reply, it is with great distress that I put this supplementary question. The Lemma disaster was a Titanic type of disaster. I wonder why the watertight compartment disappeared, causing this disaster. In the first part of the reply, the Secretary said that each year the Marine Department would conduct annual inspection on the locally licensed ferries and launches to make sure that they measure up to the requirement before the license and certificate would be issued. Over the past 3 years, we have been given all these inspection record. My question for the Secretary is this. The Lemma 4 didn't have the watertight door and compartment. Is it the case that the Marine Department didn't tell you about it, and that's why you haven't told us? In your reply, is it the case that there has been some cover-ups on the part of the Marine Department? Has there been any dereliction of duty on the part of the Marine Department? Secretary, President, in my principal reply, I didn't mention the Lemma disaster because there is a commission of inquiry that is conducting the investigation. The inquiries have hearings have been completed, but the report has yet to be submitted. So it is not appropriate for me to comment on anything regarding the inquiry. But upon the submission or the publication of the report, if there are any recommendations and observations, the government will follow up on them. Mr. Gary Fan, I'd like to follow up on the last paragraph. That there will be a comprehensive review of the existing regulatory regime and legislation, according to the Secretary. My question is, how can the government monitor the the Seafarers Training Institute to make sure that marine safety will measure up to international standard? Now, the reason I put this question is that in the course of the Commission of Inquiry's hearing, I've heard from the Seafarers Training College some views that the radar training program was not sufficiently provided because of lack of manpower, and the trainees had to queue up for the program. And the demand simply cannot be met. Now, we are concerned from the inquiry that in this disaster, and we were told that people didn't seem to be able to read the radar record. I mean, this kind of training is important. So how can the government monitor the Maritime Services Training Institute to make sure that we can measure up to international standard in terms of marine safety? Secretary, as I said, President, in my principal reply, we are reviewing comprehensively the marine safety and also the regulatory regime and the policy and so on. I've also mentioned the commissioning of the Lloyd's Register and an international marine consultant to help look at the survey procedures and the approval of plan and so on. Mr. Fan mentioned the Maritime Services Training Institute and the training program. We will follow up on this to see what's going on there. But after the Lemma disaster in October last year, as I said in the German debate, there are 10 improvement measures, and the Marine Department has liaised with the trade about how we can improve marine safety and how we can step up the training for the personnel involved. For instance, improving the examination and test for the coxswains to heighten the awareness of marine safety, and also to mandate the rest time for the seafarers, and also the minimum requirement for the number of sailors and so on. Mr. Ng Leung Sing, President, thank you. Right, in relation to the Lemma disaster, we should not comment on it until the Commission of Inquiry is done with its job. Now, the administration is seeking to improve marine safety after the incident, and in April, the government will complete a review of the regulatory regime. So in this comparative study involving Singapore, Sydney, and Southampton of the UK, now, in picking these ports, what criteria did you adopt to pick these ports? Is it because of their excellent safety record, or is it because of the similarity in terms of how busy the ports are? Secretary, well, it is the Marine Department, based on their international experience, to pick these ports. Now, in Singapore, the port is as busy as Hong Kong's. In Sydney and Southampton, they are famous ports the world over, and in these jurisdictions, in terms of marine safety and regulation of the port, they do have a lot of good practices. So it is on this basis that we conduct a benchmark survey. Dr. Kwok Ka-ki, President, hearing the Secretary's reply, the Lemma disaster would have happened because of this fine and stringent survey system. Now, when Marine Department officials were asked about the survey of the vessels, they committed amnesia. I mean, how can we trust all these expertise? Now, there are 304 ferries and vessels and launches that have been inspected, but during the summer period, there are so many pleasure craft and launches that are plying in our harbor. Many of these pleasure craft are carrying passengers, but they don't have a license. I heard from my friends that the passengers don't even know where the life jackets are. In an unlikely event that these vessels are involved in collision, I'm sure the casualty would not be no less than that of the Lemma 4. Now, for these 300, other than the 304 vessels that you've inspected, have you conducted any inspection on those pleasure craft that are plying in Hong Kong waters, or are you going to conduct any survey on safety? Secretary, President, for local vessels, the Marine Department has been conducting routine annual inspections. After the collision, the Marine Department has stepped up the inspections. In the Lemma 4, Lemma Disaster Commission of Inquiry is looking into the matter. I'm afraid I cannot comment on the details here, but marine safety is something that the government sets great store by. Under any circumstances, safety has to be given the top priority, not just after the disaster. After the marine disaster in October, we have instructed the Marine Department to step up the standard in this area. Dr. Kwok, well, there are so many pleasure craft in Hong Kong, and the danger level of danger is no less than other vessels in Hong Kong. Pleasure craft, Secretary, President, for the pleasure craft, their construction and the way they carry the passengers would be different from that of ferries. We are more concerned about ferries and launches, but it doesn't mean to say that the pleasure craft would not present any danger at all. In fact, there are so much traffic involving pleasure craft. I will approach the Marine Department to see whether something can be done about it. Mr. WONG Kwok-hing, President, in the third paragraph of the reply, the administration is conducting a comprehensive review of the existing regulatory regime and the relevant legislation. And also, there are two bodies that have been commissioned, one to conduct a study, one to carry out investigation. Now, my question is, has the administration looked at the routine law enforcement exercise to identify the problems for further study. Secretary, well, in my principal reply, the Part C, we have commissioned international experts to review the surveys and approval plans, and also to ascertain the risks. Now, after the Lama disaster, the members of the public expect us to go an extra mile to make sure that the safety standard is good enough. Now, we're conducting a benchmark survey to make sure that our standards will not fall behind other jurisdictions with high standard. After the October disaster, the Marine Department has conducted 2 areas of work. First of all, through the local vessel consultative committee, we're looking at how we can step up safety and awareness of safety. And also the THB, together with the Marine Department, convened a regular meeting to step up this endeavor. Mr. WONG Kwok-hing, well, my question remains unanswered. Has the senior echelon of the government investigated whether MD has committed any mistakes, any blunders in this regard? Secretary, well, as I said, President, the THB has been liaising with the Marine Department after the October disaster through meetings and also through other liaison work. We have been instructing the Marine Department to conduct a review on the survey and to step up the standards in general. The Commission of Inquiry is still getting on with the inquiry. A report has not been published. It's not appropriate for me to talk too much about the Lama disaster. Mr. Porche, President, the Secretary told us in his reply a lot about detention, reinspection, and so on under the existing ordinance. Other than issuing advisory or reinspection, is there anything in the law that allows the authority to instigate prosecution? If not, will the administration review the legislation in this regard? Secretary, President, when conducting the inspection, if the Marine Department finds that there are breaches of the regulation other than issuing verbal warnings, reminding the ship owners or the operators to make amends, they can also instigate prosecution. If requirements like life jacket and so on, if they fall short in relation to these requirements, the certificate of survey can be taken away so that they cannot be sailing in the waters.
Oral question, Dr. K.K. Kwok. President, according to the 2012 annual report of the Link Real Estate Investment Trust, or the Link REIT, the average monthly rent of shopping malls under the Link REIT increased from $25.40 per square foot in March 2008 to $35.80 per square foot in March 2012, representing a 41% increase. The CEO of the Link Management Limited has reportedly said that the year-on-year growth of gross sales of shop tenants in shopping malls under the Link REIT was over 10% as of September last year, and forecast that there could be a 7 to 8% rental increase in the coming 2 years. On the other hand, some residents of PRH in remote areas, particularly in Tin Shui Wai and Tung Chung, have expressed that due to the expensive external transport fares, they are very dependent on the shops in the shopping malls and fresh produce markets under the Link REIT in their housing estates. They have also pointed out that the expense on food, education, transport, etc. have already been a very heavy burden on them. The Link REIT's rental increases will lead to price increases for goods and services sold by these shops, thereby further increasing the burden on these residents. In this connection, would the government inform this Council A whether it knows the total number of small shop tenants in the shopping malls and fresh produce markets under the Link REIT in each of the past 5 years, and the respective percentages of the gross floor area rented by these tenants and the 10 large tenants of the Link REIT in total gross floor area? B, of the respective median for individual and household income of tenants in PRH in each of the 5 past years. Among the PRH tenants in the two districts in Tin Shui Wai and Tung Chung, the respective percentages of those tenants currently receiving CSSA and the disability allowance, and the respective percentages of the family income of the PRH tenants in those two districts having been spent on meeting rental, food, education, and transport expenses at present. And C, whether it knows the average monthly per square foot rent of the fresh produce markets under the link REIT in each of the past 5 years, and how such figures compare with the rental of public markets under the FEHD. Secretary for Transport and Housing. President, the Hong Kong Housing Authority, HA, divested its 180 commercial and car parking facilities through the listing of the Link Real Estate Investment Trust, or the Link REIT, in November 2005. Since then, the Link REIT is a private entity which is entirely independent of the government and the HA, and the management of its properties is solely the responsibility of the Link Management Limited, or LML. The government and the HA do not hold any shares of the LML and cannot and will not intervene in the day-to-day operation and business management of the LML. For the first and third parts of the question, they relate to the rental information of the LML. As mentioned above, the Link REIT is a private entity, and neither the government nor the HA has any involvement in its management. Hence, the government and the HA do not have the relevant information as requested in the question. However, we have made inquiries to the LML in respect of Dr. Honorable Kwok's question, and the LML has provided some information for members' reference. According to information provided by LML, as at the 31st of March 2012, shops operated by independent operators with an area less than 1,000 square feet, excluding shops run by the top 50 tenants of the Link REIT, chain stores and listed companies, accounted for about 60% of the total number of retail shops in its property portfolio. Since the listing of the Link REIT, the number of such small shop tenants has increased by about 20%. As for the information on the rental levels of the Link REIT's markets and cooked food stores of the past 5 years, please refer to the annex. It could be noted that for 2011-12 and 2012-13, as at September 2012, the average monthly per square foot rent is $65.20 and $67.30 respectively. At present, the average monthly per square foot rent of the market and cooked food stores under the HA is $37 and $24 respectively, while that of market and cooked food stores under the FEHD in 2011 and 2012 were $31 and $30.90 respectively. However, we should not simply compare the rental levels, since rental levels are often determined by various factors such as the districts the markets are in, the location of individual stores, the trade category, the business nature, and also pedestrian flow. Though the Link REIT is a private entity, we do expect that it can run its retail and shopping center facilities based on the concept of shopping centers for local communities, so as to cater for the needs and affordability of residents. The management of the LML indicated previously at the Legislative Council that they understood the Link REIT would need to serve the residents of public housing estates. Therefore, when determining rentals, they would take into account the business performance of retailers and the market trend so as to try to maintain the rental at an affordable level. We'll continue our dialogue with the management of the Link REIT and relate to them the views of this council and the public. As for the second part of the question, according to the information from the 2006 population by census and the 2011 population census carried out by the Census and Statistics Department, the median monthly income from main employment of the working population in PRH households in 2006 and 2011 were $8,000 and $8,790 respectively, while the median monthly income of all PRH households in the same period were $11,000 and $12,000 respectively. As the 2006 population by census did not collect statistics on PRH tenants who were receiving CSSA and Social Security Allowance SSA, including OH allowance and disability allowance, we can only provide the data for 2011 here. According to the 2011 population census carried out by the CNSD, the number of PRH households living in Tin Shui Wai New Town was about 55,100. About 19% of the households were with family members receiving CSSA, and about 11% were with family members receiving the SSA. The number of PRH households living in Tung Chung was about 12,800. About 13% of the households were with family members receiving CSSA, and about 9% of them had family members receiving SSA. The CNSD conducts a household expenditure survey, or HES, once every 5 years to provide information on the monthly household expenditure by commodity or service. The latest HES, conducted in 2009-2010, could provide relevant information regarding residents in the Yuen Long and Islands districts. But due to the limited sampling size, there is no breakdown and analysis on Tin Shui Wai and Tung Chung. As reference, rental expenditure accounted for 21% of the total expenditure of residents in the Yuen Long district, and this includes rates and government rent. Expenditure on food and education accounted for about 31% and 5%, whereas traveling expenses accounted for about 11%. As for residents in the Islands district, rental expenditure, including rates and government rent, accounted for about 27% of the total expenditure. Expenditure on food and education accounted for about 25% and 5%, whereas traveling expenses accounted for about 8%. Thank you, President. Dr. K.K. Kwok. President, the link REIT is a vampire. Under the 2005 government policy, the government gave birth to this deformed fetus. We can see that the average income was about $8,800, which is about 70% of other families and households. In Tin Shui Wai, if they were not on CSSA, they would be on SSA, and in Tung Chung, this percentage was 22%. In these families, they would have to spend a lot of money to buy food from other districts, and that is not feasible. So the government has plowed in $20 million to operate a bazaar in Tin Shui Wai. But then it is not helping residents because there is no fresh produce sold there, and people do not frequent that bazaar or market. I'd like to ask the Secretary, for people living in Tung Chung and Tin Shui Wai, the link REIT is getting money from a beggar's bowl. What is your policy? Have you considered, 1, to repurchase link REIT, and 2, in HA estates, you should build shopping malls and fresh produce markets, or through the FEHD, you should build markets and also cook food stalls so residents get some reprieve so they will not be exploited by link REIT. Secretary. President, indeed, as I said in the main reply, those living in Tin Shui Wai and Tung Chung and residents of PRH, indeed, they have lower income. And also those in Yuen Long and the Islands district, they spend a relatively high percentage of their income on food, etc. But then, this is not the same as repurchasing link REIT. These are two separate matters, as I explained in an earlier motion debate at this council. First, we have to fork out a lot of public money to repurchase link REIT. And 2, the relevant law supervising link REIT also bans any influence on link REIT. That is, even if we repurchase link REIT, we may not be able to influence the daily operation of LML. So at the moment, there is no consideration of repurchasing link REIT. But then it doesn't mean that we are not concerned about the needs of residents to buy food and other produce. Members asked about Tin Shui market or bazaar. This is the first time we have tried to create a local bazaar for providing commodities and food. I believe with further efforts, we can certainly achieve good results. And also, since 2005, in newly built PRH estates, the HA has built its own commercial facilities in order to provide daily necessities to the public. in Domain in Yau Tong, that is a big shopping mall. The HA provides commercial facilities up to a floor area of 200,000 square meters. And we are also planning for other facilities, 18 of them, measuring a total of 49,000 square meters. The FEHD will look at market demand and supply in providing markets and cooked food stalls. But then the Audit Commission reminded the administration before that the building of public markets is rather costly. Therefore, it is proposed that the administration should conduct a comprehensive review on the market operation first before building new markets. Is it that your supplementary has not been answered? Yes, I was asking about Tin Shui Wai and Tung Chung. I haven't heard any reply. I'm asking whether in Tin Shui Wai and Tung Chung, whether the HA or the FEHD would provide shopping malls, markets, or cooked food stalls to make life easier for residents. STH. President, if you talk about the building of shopping malls, etc., we have to consider constraints like space, etc. But in existing PRH estates, the HA does have plan to improve existing retail facilities. And if there is space, it can be considered that there could be more retail facilities set up. Mr. LEUNG Kwok-hing, President. The STH doesn't live in public housing, but I do. I'd like to ask you, what else can you build in PRH estates, because you have divested your assets to the LINK REIT. STH, before you became an official, I was at a trial. I took part in that court trial. You took the case to the CFA, and the administration told the judge that the judge could rest assured after the LINK REIT took over, and if residents could not buy their daily necessities, and if the LINK REIT should cause damage to them, in other words, they could not find the daily necessities they needed, then you said you would provide the facilities, including taking buses to those areas to provide the facilities. And also you said that you would build a market amongst the residential blocks. So are you going to deliver what you promised? That's what Dr. K.K. Kwok asked you. You said so at the CFA. What are you talking about now? These people are poor people. They live in poor districts. How can you ask them to go to a shopping mall charging market rent? When are you going to deliver your solemn promises given to the Court of Final Appeal? When? STH. President. In 2005, before and when the LINK REIT was listed, I did not live in PRH, but I heard about it, so I knew what happened. No matter what the decision was, at present, we have to understand that the LINK REIT is a reality, and also in all new PRH estates, including all those built after 2005, we have not handed over any facilities to the LINK REIT. And the HA's direction and the administration's practice now is to try our very best to develop and improve facilities and retail facilities under the management of the HA in PRH estates. As to Tin Shui Wai and Tung Chung, they are in remote areas, and we understand that they have high living expenses. We have to take a comprehensive look. We don't think that this is just about a market. You have not answered my question. Please repeat your question. He said that in new PRH estates, he would not hand over any facilities to the LINK REIT. Please repeat your supplementary. I was asking about the old estates because the pledge given to the CFA was that where the car parking facilities and the shopping malls were divested, and if residents would not be getting the same facilities as before, then the HA would create a shopping mall amongst the residential blocks to serve them. So what was your answer? Secretary, any supplement? President, as I said, we would try our best to work within existing PRH estates. We could try to improve the retail points and also shopping malls operated by the HA. And then in new PRH estates, we would build new facilities. Can I ask once again? He should have understood me. That is, in existing PRH estates, you said that you would build facilities and you would provide shuttle buses to take people to buy commodities. Those were the 4 solemn promises. Okay, please sit down. Secretary, let me see whether you would like to supplement on Mr. LEUNG Kwok-hing's question, and that is on the pledge you gave to the CFA with regard to what you are going to do in existing estates. Any supplement? President, I wouldn't like to supplement more on the main reply, but then Mr. LEUNG Kwok-hing mentioned the 2005 CFA hearing. Now, if the HA said anything at the trial there, I would be very happy to dig up the records to see what we said. Ms. Chen Yun-han, President, it is not just that the administration said so at the court. Of course, the link REIT was listed as a decision by HA, but then when you came to the LegCo, you reiterated time and again that the shopping malls and car parking facilities will still serve the public. Mr. President, you have been in LegCo for a long time. I'm sure you must have heard that kind of argument. We are not talking about new estates, but existing estates. The reality is that the rental in shopping malls managed by link REIT is 100% more than those managed by the HA or the VHD. So people are trapped. Your promise was that grassroots in PRH estates would not have to pay a high price for what they buy, but this is not what has happened. And if I could show the election manifesto of CY Leung, he said that he would check and balance such monopolies. He said that he would build retail facilities nearby in order to check and balance the situation. What is your question, Ms. Chan? My question is very simple, and that is how you are going to make up for the shortfall, because you said that after divestment of HA assets, it is not just Tin Shui Wai and Tung Chung. The same is happening in all districts. How can you maintain affordable retail outlets for residents? I think you really need to compensate the residents. STH. President, all in all, the administration cannot control prices at markets and retail outlets. Now, of course, if the facilities are provided by government, then the HA or the government will abide by our rental policies. Back to 2005, when the link REIT was listed, as I said, when I answered Mr. LEUNG Kwok-hing, I would be very happy to go back and dig up the court records to see what HA said at the judicial review hearing. But no matter what was said there, I remember in a motion debate on the link route here in the council, I said that the government and the HA would very much like to improve existing shopping malls and retail facilities to allow the public to have more choices. But specifically, what can be done? How much can be done in specific districts? That would depend a lot on whether shopping malls could be built. If not, whether other facilities can be provided by expanding existing facilities. That is what the HA would like to do. Mr. Chan Han Pan. Thank you, President. If link REIT rents should not spiral, the most effective way is to introduce competition. We said many years that in Tin Shui Wai and Tung Chung there should be public markets set up. But the administration has turned a deaf ear to us. Just now the STH said he would have to go back and dig up the records. In fact, in previous motions and debates, a lot of proposals have been put forward, but the administration has not taken heed. And the public now doubt whether the administration is condoning what the link REIT is doing so it can play a leading role in increasing rent. Are you condoning what the link REIT is doing? If not, when are you going to build in FEHD market in Tin Shui Wai and Tung Chung? STH, President, number one, the government is not condoning any private enterprise, including the link REIT, but it is not possible for the government to interfere with the workings of a private entity lightly. In my main reply, and also at the end of last year when there was a motion debate here in the Council, I explained very clearly the legal provisions. As to providing a public market, as I said, should we build a public market? The FEHD has to consider different factors, including the district concerned and also cost effectiveness. The Audit Commission indeed compiled a thematic report to remind the government that in considering the provision of a new market, the government must be careful in vetting the cost and also its profitability or viability. If there are already private markets or malls in a particular district, then we really have to think about how that would influence on the viability of a new market. But I agree, if there are choices and competition in the market, then indeed the public, who are consumers, would be better protected. Is that your question has not been answered? President, please just repeat your supplementary. I was asking that in Tin Shui Wai and Tung Chung, prices are expensive, and yet you said you would have to take a review. Mr. Chen Han-pan, please do not make a statement. I believe the STH has already answered your question. We have spent 23 minutes on this oral question. That's all for oral questions today.
Bill, first reading. Education Amendment